We were just watching TV. Then I said everything I'd been holding for 3 years. I didn't plan it. The room went quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Nothing has been the same since, in the best way I wasn't ready for. Posted to r/true off my chest. It was a Tuesday evening. We were on the couch. The show we were watching had finished, and neither of us had reached for the remote to find something else, and we were in that particular quiet of two people who have been together long enough that silence is comfortable, or what I had been telling myself was comfortable, or what I had learned to perform as comfortable, because the alternative was naming what the silence actually was. Daniel said, "You okay?" He says this sometimes. Not in the pointed way of someone who has noticed something specific, in the ambient, low-attention way of someone filling a pause. Most of the time, I say yes. Most of the time, yes is the answer I have prepared, and the answer requires no further maintenance, once given. I said, "Not entirely." He looked at me. That was the beginning. I have been with Daniel for 4 years. We have lived together for 2. He is, by most measurements, a good partner, present, kind, not cruel, genuinely interested in my well-being. I want to say that clearly before I tell you what I said on the Tuesday evening, because what I said was not an indictment of a bad man. It was an honest account of a growing distance in a relationship between two people who cared about each other and had been, in different ways, not saying what needed to be said. What I had been not saying. I had been not saying that I felt invisible in the relationship in a way that I could not easily point to, because the invisibility was not made of dramatic failures, but of small, consistent absences. I was not asking for things and not getting them. I was not asking for things at all, because somewhere in the first year I had learned the particular shape of Daniel's responsiveness and had quietly adjusted my asking to fit within it, and the adjustment had become the habit, and the habit had become the texture of us. And I had stopped noticing the adjustment as a compromise and started experiencing it as normal. I had been not saying that I wanted more than I was getting and did not know how to say that in a way that was fair, because what I was not getting was not specific enough to point at, not a thing he did or failed to do, but a quality of attention, of being known at a level below the surface, of being asked the questions that required knowing me well enough to know what to ask. I had been not saying that I was lonely inside the relationship. That is the hardest kind of lonely to name because it requires also saying, I am with someone who loves me and I am still lonely, which sounds ungrateful and confusing and produces in the person saying it a reflexive guilt that makes the saying even harder. I had been not saying these things for approximately 2 years. Not because I was afraid of conflict, not exactly. Because I did not know how to say them in a way that was fair to Daniel, who had not done anything I could specifically name, who would reasonably ask what exactly he was supposed to do differently, and for whom I did not have a clean answer. But Tuesday evening Daniel said, "You okay?" in the ambient way, and I said, "Not entirely," and then there was a moment, just a moment, a breath, where the sentence was in the air, and I could have qualified it, softened it, redirected it, said something like just tired, long week, and I did not. I said, "I've been feeling invisible for a while. Not because of anything specific. Just a pattern." He said, "What do you mean, invisible?" And then, without having planned any of it, without the prepared language or the careful framing or the therapist-approved entry point, I said what I had been thinking for 2 years. I want to try to give you the shape of what I said because the shape matters. I said it was like watching someone love the idea of me more than they were curious about me. That Daniel knew the facts of my life, my work, my schedule, my food preferences, my family history, but that there was a level below the facts where I lived and that I did not feel him living there with me. That I had stopped volunteering that level because it had not been asked for enough times, that I had learned not to offer it, and that the not offering had left me with the feeling of being only partly seen, which is its own particular loneliness. I said that I had spent 2 years adjusting my needs to fit the bandwidth available, and that the adjusting had been so thorough that I was no longer sure Daniel knew who he was actually with, because who he was with had been edited for his comfort in ways I had not told him about, and had barely told myself. I said that I was not saying he was a bad partner. I was saying that I had been a dishonest one, not through lying but through omission, and that the omission had put a kind of distance between us that I had been feeling for a long time, and had not known how to close, because closing it required saying the thing, and saying the thing required admitting it existed. I said, "I don't know if this is fixable. I don't know if what I need is something you're able to give." I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I've been sitting with it for 2 years and I don't want to sit with it for 2 more without you knowing I'm sitting with it. I stopped. The room was quiet. Daniel was looking at me with an expression I had not seen before, which was not what I expected. I had expected something defensive, or something that flinched away from the weight of what I had said. What I saw instead was attention. Complete, still attention. The expression of someone who has been handed something heavy and is holding it very carefully. He said, "How long have you felt like this?" I said, 2 years roughly. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I couldn't find a way to say it that didn't feel unfair. You haven't done anything specific." I kept thinking I needed to identify the thing and I couldn't, and without the thing to point to I felt like I didn't have a case. He said, "You don't need a case." I said, "I know that now." He said, "I wish you had told me." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think I knew something was off. I didn't know what. I kept thinking it would sort itself out if I just kept showing up." I said, "That's what I kept thinking too." He said, "It didn't sort itself out." I said, "No." What followed was 2 hours of conversation that I do not have the words to fully reconstruct and would not want to because it was private in the way of conversations that reached the real thing, genuinely private, belonging to the two people in it rather than to an account of it. What I can tell you is its texture. Daniel asked questions I had not been asked. Not surface questions, questions that went to the level below the facts, the level I had described feeling invisible at, and asked what was there. He asked what I actually wanted from the relationship. Not what I thought I should want, not what seemed reasonable to ask for, what I actually wanted. I answered as honestly as I knew how, which was imperfectly, but more honestly than I had answered that question in years. He told me things I had not known, that he had sensed me getting smaller over time and had not been able to name it, that he had been afraid to ask directly because he had been afraid of what the answer would be, that the thing he had thought was contentment in me, my adaptation, my accommodation, had read to him as ease, as evidence that things were fine, when it was actually evidence that I had become very practiced at not saying they weren't. We had both been performing a version of fine. Neither version was dishonest, exactly. Neither of us had been pretending from cynicism or manipulation. We had both been protecting something, him from the fear of the answer, me from the unfairness of having no specific thing to point to, and the protection had produced a distance we had both been feeling and neither of us had been naming. The room, after the 2 hours, felt different. Not resolved. I want to be careful about that word because nothing was resolved in the sense of finished and wrapped. But different in a way I am still trying to describe accurately. Lighter in some directions. Heavier in others. More real than it had been before the Tuesday evening, which meant it was both more difficult and more solid at the same time. Daniel said at the end of it something I have been thinking about since. He said, "I'm glad you said it. I'm sorry it took this long to be said. I think some of that is on me. I should have asked better questions." I said, "Some of it is on me too. I should have said it before I had a fully built case. You don't need evidence to say that you're not okay." He said, "No, you don't." We sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "What do we do now?" I said, "I don't know exactly. I think we figure it out." He said, "Together?" I said, "If you want to." He said, "I want to." We are in couples therapy now. 3 sessions in with a therapist named Dr. Folake Adeyemi, who asks good questions and has a gift for making the thing underneath the thing visible to both people at the same time in a way that feels less like exposure and more like finally using a light in a room you've been navigating in the dark. I want to tell you that therapy has been easy. It has not been easy. It has been the specific discomfort of 2 people learning to say things they had practiced not saying in a room with someone whose job is to make the saying possible. There have been sessions that left me drained. There have been sessions after which Daniel and I drove home mostly silent and then sat at the kitchen table and had a second version of the conversation that was easier than the first version. What I want to tell you is that it has been worth it. Each session. The draining ones especially. I have started asking for things I stopped asking for 2 years ago. Not all at once, slowly, the way you test weight on a floor you weren't sure would hold. Daniel has been responding. Not perfectly, not every time, not always in exactly the form I was asking for, but in the honest, effortful way of someone who had not known what was needed and now knows and is trying. The trying is visible. I had not understood how much I needed the trying to be visible. I want to close with the thing I have been most sure of since the Tuesday evening. What I said on that couch was not planned. I did not have the right words in advance, or the correct framing, or the therapist-approved entry point. I had a moment where the ambient question of "you okay?" found me not prepared with yes, and I said not entirely, and then the door was open and I walked through it because it had been closed for 2 years, and I was tired. Nothing was resolved by the saying. Nothing magically healed. What changed was the atmosphere, the texture of the relationship, the quality of what was present between us. Before the Tuesday evening, we were 2 people sitting in a room, each managing something alone. After it, we were 2 people sitting in a room who knew the other person was managing something and had decided to do it together. That is the smallest possible unit of what a relationship is supposed to be. I had been without it for 2 years. I have it now. I had it because I said the thing. I did not wait until I had a case. I did not wait until the evidence was organized or the language was prepared or the time was right. I just said not entirely when he asked if I was okay, and then I said the rest. Say the rest. Edit. Daniel brought me coffee this morning without being asked, which he has always done sometimes and which I have always received as ordinary because I had adjusted to receiving it as ordinary. This morning I said, "Thank you. I really like when you do that." He stopped and looked at me. He said, "You've never said that before." I said, "I know. I'm saying it now." He said, "I'll keep doing it." Small. Real. Ours. Edit 2. Dr. Adiemi asked me in our last session what I would say to the version of myself from 2 years ago, the one who had started adjusting and had not said anything. I thought about it for a long time. I said, "You don't need a case. You don't need to have identified the specific thing. Not okay is enough. Not okay is the whole case." She wrote something down. I don't know what. I hope it was that.